to be here and very honored. Thank you to the committee, the organizers, and importantly to the other teams that participate in the competition. Thank you for a great competition on Sunday. So we'll have to begin the presentation again. We are Wayfair's, part of Wayfair's Demand Forecasting Science team. This is Ryan Mitchell, Arsen Mixer, and myself, George Monocrusos. And so we'll talk about how we do demand forecasting at Wayfair. Here is the agenda. First, Ryan is going to talk about the brief overview of Wayfair as a company, the challenges we face in demand forecasting at Wayfair. He's going to pass them out along to Arsa, who's going to provide some more specifics on the science methodology behind our main workforce model called Demetra, and also some of the engineering infrastructure we deploy. Then back to Arsa, who's going to talk about what happens after the forecasts are generated downstream, the operationalization of our method. And finally, on to me, I'm going to talk about some impacts of our Demetra forecast both internally and our assessment of external impacts, potential external impacts on the community. So off to you.
Hey everyone. So I'm going to go over the main problem we face in demand forecasting, and there's kind of a few other things I'm going to include in this section as well. I'll give a brief intro to exactly what Wayfair is, just for those who don't know. Take a little look at our requirements, exactly what our requirements are as a demand forecasting team at Wayfair, and then we'll have a little look at the input data we're using before diving into the challenges we face and what we're trying to solve as a team. So what is Wayfair? So we're online and physical retailer selling home goods and furniture. Large catalogue, over 4 million different products. So we have Wayfair, which is kind of our main brand selling those items, and then we have some smaller kind of sister brands. You can see here Justin Main, Birch Lane, All Modern, and Perigold. Active in 4 geos. US is kind of our main market. Canada is our second largest, and then we also have the UK and Ireland. We have over 22 million customers, partnerships with over 20,000 suppliers, and in the last fiscal year, revenue of $12 billion. So what's our requirements as a demand forecasting team? Well, we have a few. So first thing, we want to produce monthly demand forecasts, 1 month to 18 months ahead in the future. And you can see here that I put a couple of examples of some of the items that we sell at Wayfair. Very heterogeneous catalogue of items. So our main kind of level in the hierarchy is going to be product level forecasts. And a few things, we care about accuracy, also bias and stability in our forecast, and then we also want our forecast to be explainable to suppliers. So a large part of this explainability is the forecast plausible? We're looking at historical data, now we're looking at forecast. Does it make sense what we're forecasting for suppliers? So that's a large part of what we mean here by explainability. Now onto some of our input data properties. So we have this kind of business rated hierarchy. So on the bottom level in the hierarchy, we're going to have item level. This hierarchy is for the US specifically. So we have item level in the US, sell 2.6 million different items. Similar items can then be grouped into what we call subclasses. Similar subclasses are grouped into classes. Similar classes then grouped into category. Then we finally have the top level of the hierarchy, which is country level. So this hierarchy is essentially key in our forecasting design, Demetra. Essentially, we're going to leverage this hierarchy in order to help us forecast, what we really care about, and what we really care about is that bottom level of the hierarchy, those item levels. So in the US, there's 2.6 million items. So now onto the challenges we're facing as a demand forecast team. And I've broken these into 2 different buckets. So we have a lot of challenges, and the first bucket I want to talk about is the challenges we're actually trying to directly solve with our core demand forecasting model, Demetra. Then later in the presentation, I'll talk about kind of a second set of challenges that we have that we solve in this post-processing phase. So after we produce our item level demand forecast from Demetra, we go into kind of this post-processing phase where we have some adjustments to the forecast to deal with additional challenges. But let's start with our main challenges that we're addressing with our demand forecast model. First one is data sparsity. So, as you can expect, selling over 4 million different items, you're going to have a lot of data sparsity in our catalog. So 75% of our items that we sell are going to have more zero sale months than non-zero sale months. So when you look at the product level, it's going to be very hard to pick up trends and seasonality for these sparse items. Secondly, we have complex seasonality in our catalog. So right-hand side, I've got two graphs. So we have kind of 3 types of seasonality we split into. I'm displaying 2 types here in this graph. So I've got one showing Christmas trees. Demand is usually kind of spiking in November. And then on the right-hand side, we've got gas grills. Demand is usually spiking around the summertime. And then we have this third group of items, which we kind of call low seasonality. They kind of have this subdued seasonality, so they don't exhibit such large seasonal peaks as you see here. I think, as you can expect, capturing these seasonal peaks is kind of vital for inventory planning. Usually the suppliers for these seasonal items, they like to plan pretty far in advance, so assuming most of their demand is coming from one month, it's key that we're getting accurate forecasts for the peak. Third challenge is trend breaks. So on the right here, I plotted aggregate demand for the US over the last kind of 12, 13 years. As you can see, there's a couple of potential trend breaks, 2020, 2023. So yeah, another challenge for us, we need to make sure we're careful exactly how we're segmenting our data, our training data, before we put it into the Demetra model. And then lastly, the challenge we're solving with Demetra is this idea of new product entry. So a lot of churn in our catalog, tens of thousands of items entering, new items entering into our catalog every single month. So a lot of short time series to deal with. 50% of our catalog has less than 24 months of data. So again, when you're looking at the product level, it's pretty tough then to pick up kind of trends and seasonality with such short time series. So overall, as a forecasting team, our goal is solve these challenges in an explainable way for suppliers whilst producing accurate forecasts, but also in close coordination with our stakeholders. So we've got internal stakeholders downstream, like inventory planners, and then we've got our external stakeholders, which are the suppliers. And something here which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later is that our final forecasts feed into what we call our inventory planning application, or IPA for short. You can think of this as kind of a portal where internal and external stakeholders can actually view the final forecast in kind of an easy to consume and friendly way. So before I pass over to Arsa, who's going to dive into the kind of more the nuts and bolts of Demetra, I wanted to give a high-level overview of our demand forecasting solution. So at the heart of this, we're leveraging the hierarchy, and we're also doing some ensembling. So the idea here is that we're producing 2 competing item level forecasts. First one is coming from a top-down methodology. So we'll forecast at the class level of that hierarchy, which I showed earlier. There's about 1,000 different classes in the US. And then we disaggregate that class level demand down into item level demand to get the first competing item level forecast. Then the second building block, we're going to use a bottom-up methodology, so machine learning method, to forecast directly at the product level to get our second competing item level forecast. And then our third building block is we're going to ensemble these forecasts together. We've kind of taken 2 different approaches to ensemble. First is unweighted 50-50 ensemble between the 2 forecasts, but also this differential ensembling approach where we actually weight the top-down and bottom-up forecast differently depending on the exact pocket of the catalog that we're looking at. And then the final item forecast pops out of our ensembling model. Why did we choose to ensemble this top down, this item forecast going from top down, this item forecast going from bottom up. Well, here I have a table of kind of what we expect and our intuition behind what the pros and cons should be for top down and bottom up, and we can see they complement each other pretty well. So if we look at kind of the time series aspect here, we may expect top down to be able to produce kind of better longer term forecasts. They may be able to pick up longer term trends and seasonality a little bit better. But then bottom up, because it's training directly at the item level, we've got a lot of short time series. We may expect bottom up to have some struggle basically picking up long term trends and seasonality. But it could be better at forecasting short term because it has that product level information, so it could have some more short term responsiveness. If we look at kind of the cross-sectional aspect of our problem here, then we might think top-down could be better at forecasting those pockets of the catalogs that have more intermittent time series. Whereas again, maybe bottom-up could struggle with intermittent time series if it's just looking at the product level. But maybe it's better when we give it high volume time series. So overall idea here is that combining top down and bottom up, we expect the cons, or hopefully the cons to cancel out. So now I'm going to hand it over to Arthur, who's going to dive more into our methodology.
Thank you, Ryan. My name is Arsen Niksat, and today I will discuss about our methodology. Specifically, I review top-down, bottom-up ensemble approach, and I will briefly talk about our implementation and engineering aspects of our model. As Ryan mentioned, our data follows a hierarchical structure. At the lowest level, we have item level. When we move up and aggregate, we get to subclass, class, category, and finally the country level. For the top-down, we start at the class level. We generate forecasts, and then we disaggregate it to the item level, and that's the item level representative of the top down. For the bottom up, we run live GBM directly at the item level, and we have second completing methods at the item level. Finally, we ensemble these two to have the final ensemble forecast. I have to mention that we have also explored forecasting at the different levels of hierarchy, forecasting at the country level and subclass level, and disaggregating the item level. However, the forecast from class level turned out to be the most accurate forecast when evaluated at the item level, mostly because it captures seasonality better than the other two levels. Additionally, we also tested structural scaling reconciliation approach. Again, when evaluated at the item level, specifically by RMSE and bias, it did not outperform the final Demetra model. I would like to emphasize 2 points here. The first is our mandate is accuracy at the item level. And the second is we care about bias significantly in parallel to RMSE. Majority of our catalog is sparse, and our stakeholder really care about bias of our model. So we need to make sure that any competing models outperform the legacy, specifically for the intermittent ones in terms of the bias. Let's start with the top-down. For the top-down, as Ryan mentioned, we have different seasonal pattern in our data. We have winter seasonal, summer seasonal, and what we call the low seasonal, where the seasonal strength is weaker than the other two groups. To better capture this seasonal behavior, when we look at the class level series, we split it to these 3 seasonal groups. Then we run the mean ensemble of 4 univariate models of ETS, ARIMA, SES, and data model following the methodology proposed by Metropolis and Spencer. We have a minor deviation from their approach. We take the mean ensemble instead of median because it turns out to be more accurate for our data. Once we have the top-line forecast, the next step is disaggregation. For disaggregation, we have a customized algorithm that for each forecast horizon, we determine market share by looking at a specific loopback window. For example, if we want to forecast 1 month ahead, we look at the market share of the lag 1 month ago, and lag 3 months ago, and we ensemble them with 50-50 weight. These weights are determined through the grid search. And finally, once we have the market share for each item, for all 18 forecast horizon, we multiply this market share to the top line forecast to get the final item. Moving to bottom-up approach, we use recursive like GBM with tweedy loss. Recursive here means that we forecast 1 month ahead, and we pass that forecast to the training data. We regenerate all those features that are required to be generated, and then we continue the process of moving to the next step until we get to the last forecast ones. As Ryan mentioned, sparsity is one of our key issues. In bottom-up, to overcome that challenge, we have 2 solutions. The first is tweedy loss, and the second is data segmentation. Tweedy could be helpful if the data is zero inflated and right skewed. It has a parameter called tweedy variance power that we can tune and basically give us the flexibility of switching between Poisson to gamma on left to the right by changing this parameter. And in terms of the data segmentation, instead of fitting one light GBM model on all data, we break down our data to the seasonal groups, subgroups, per volume, high and low, and also per country. The intuition here is if we do this splitting, we get a more homogeneous data characteristics, and possibly we might get a better model. In terms of the feature, we have a feature pools that consist of calendar feature, basic demand feature, which are lags, rolling statistics of lags, and lag interactions like lag ratios and lag differences. And we also have a categorical features or product identifier, like to which class, subclass, supplier, or segment this item belongs. For each subset, that subset inherits some or all of these features by feature selection by elimination approach. So each section has its own standalone GBM model that is tuned based on its characteristics. And once we have both top-down and bottom-up forecasts ready at the item level, the next step is to ensemble. We have experimented with 2 approaches in terms of ensembling, equal weight, 50-50, and differential ensembler or the weighted average. Both methods has outperformed our legacy models that we had in production, but the differential ensembler was better. So our thought process behind differential ensembler is that we can define or assign customized weight to top-down and bottom-up for each subset of the data per forecast horizon. So to determine these weights, we incrementally increase the weight between top-down and bottom-up by 5% increment, and we create all these model combinations. Then we evaluate them. The evaluation is based on RMSE, bias, RMSE and bias for the peak months for the seasonal, and to some degree stability of the forecast. All these weights are determined through standard train validation test procedures. Additionally, once we are done, we have a secondary algorithms that make sure that these weights are smooth. The transition between forecast horizon are smooth, so we avoid jagged forecast. And finally, we update this whole process of ensembling every 6 months to capture any potential demand shift. So in this slide, I have the weights between top-down and bottom-up for high volumes. On the y-axis, we have the weights between bottom-up and top-down. On the x-axis, we have the forecast horizon. And the 3 charts are the 3 different seasonality, again for high volume. The key takeaway is for high volumes, bottom-up usually gets more weights. The weights are either constant or increasing by forecast horizon. In a similar manner, if we go to the low volume, now the weights are opposite. Top-downs get more weights, and as the forecast horizon increases, we get more weights toward top-down. And for some cases like summer seasonal, it is 100% top-down. Again, this is because we had the bias criteria and the bottom of the IGBM did not meet that bias criteria, so we ended up with 100% for the top-down. In terms of implementation and engineering, our solution is fully integrated into the Google Cloud platform. We use several services for efficiency and scalability. For orchestrations, we use Airflow-Composer for running the pipeline, basically orchestrating the pipeline. For data storage, we use cloud storage. And for generating light GBM features, we use PySpark and in Dataproc to parallelize feature generations in a quick way. For model fitting and inference, we use Vertex AI. Deployment is Google Kubernetes engines. And finally, any post-processing query is done through the BigQuery section. Major open source libraries that we are using, we use Nextella ML Forecast to generate features only. We have our own customized like GBM. We just use Nextella to generate quickly features, mainly leveraging their novel implementations for quick feature generation. We use Nextella Stat Forecast for univariate models, and of course we have light GBM for training application. With that, I will hand it back to Ryan to speak about operationalizations for model.
Yeah, so in this stage, or this part of the presentation, I want to give a general overview of our engineering pipeline and the different steps that we have. So this is high-level overview of our engineering pipeline and the steps from start to finish. So we rerun the pipeline every month at the start of the month, and we'll refresh our forecast for the next 18 months and repeat that process every month to make sure that we're taking into account the most recent demand data. You can see here that the first part of the pipeline I've outlined in red, that's going to be Demetra, so that's what Asa just spoke about. We've got a top-down, bottom-up, and our ensembling part of the pipeline. What I also want to talk about is this second stage in our pipeline, which is post-processing. So essentially, item forecast is going to come out of Demetra, and then we're going to have some kind of adjustments and extra tasks to carry out. We've got three main building blocks in this post-processing phase. We've got our business adjustments, our sanity checks, and also our prediction intervals. So let's start with sanity checks. Mainly this is essentially making sure the month-over-month change in the forecast is not too crazy and it's explainable for suppliers. So we'll run some checks for that and do any deep dives when necessary. The business adjustments and prediction intervals are a little bit more involved, so I'll go into more detail for both of those. So let's start with the business adjustments. So at the start of the presentation, I was telling you about all these challenges that we face, and I outlined 4 challenges that we're solving with Demetra, and I said there's a bunch of other challenges. So all those other challenges that we're not solving with Demetra, we're solving in this business adjustments step. And I've outlined the main ones here. So first one is promotional events. Of course, as an online retailer, we're doing continual promotional events. Those promotional events, which are just one-off, kind of short-term promotional events that we don't know in advance, we basically add demand back on for those promotional events in this business adjustment phase. The amount of demand that we're adding back on is going to be based on the future known price changes that we're making for those promotional events. In fact, the reason we're not doing this in Demetra is because we know all this information last minute, so it's not really feasible to include it online. Second challenge is the idea of stockouts. We want to make sure that we're forecasting true demand, not just the sales level. Think about an item that historically is kind of in and out of stock all the time. If we just take the sales numbers, forecast that, we're probably going to be under bias for its true demand because it's been out of stock a bunch of time. So to account for this, we're going to add lost sales estimates back onto our forecast to get true demand levels. The next thing, internal company policies. Wayfair has kind of a few things to kind of incentivize suppliers to take better actions that should improve basically customer satisfaction. And one of those main things is that Wayfair will say, if you're a supplier and you offer faster shipping, and you start to reduce kind of your instant rates during the shipping process to the customer, then we're essentially going to benefit you by boosting your items up the ranking page on Wayfair. And of course, that's going to lead to higher customer impressions and then higher demand. If suppliers decide to take these actions, we need to kind of add this demand boost back onto our Demetra forecast as well. And then finally, we have granular disaggregation. So, our main forecast of interest is going to be that monthly product level for each country. But when needed, we have some models that can break this forecast down further. So we have this regional model, break it down into different regions within the US. And then we also have a model to break it down from monthly level to daily level. So those are some extra challenges that we're solving with this business adjustment process. And then also in that post-processing phase, we want to produce prediction intervals. So we want to have item level prediction intervals so we can get safety stock suggestions for suppliers as well. The way we're modeling this, we're trying to kind of estimate three main parts of the distribution: the mean, the variance, and the distribution type. The mean of our distribution here is going to be our Demetra point forecast, and then plus those business adjustments that I just mentioned. Our variance of the distribution, we're going to calculate from out-of-sample forecast errors. For each item, if an item has, we've been poorly forecasting in the future, and it's got large out-of-sample errors, it's going to have a large variance to kind of represent this, and vice versa. We're following some literature, Lee and Schultz, 2014 on this. And then finally, once we've got our mean and variance, we want to fit distribution type around this mean and variance. So we'll cycle through a few different distribution types. Mainly we'll look at binomial and negative binomial, depending on the mean variance ratio. And then we'll also look at the normal distribution. Then we'll test, which of these distributions has the best fit, and we'll choose that distribution. To test which distribution has the best fit, we're following methodology by Diebold et al. And then finally, we have our item level prediction, demand distributions, and we can use these kind of as an input then to give safety stock suggestions to suppliers. Okay, so that covers first part of our pipeline Demetra, second part where we're doing some post-processing adjustments, and then we have the final part of our pipeline, this inventory planning application. So this is where we essentially display our final output to our internal and external stakeholders. So we're going to have a final point forecast, we're going to have upper and lower bounds, then we're also going to have our demand uplifts. So as I said earlier, it's...
Just a quick, sorry to interrupt. When you say business adjustment, is that the override at the item level? Is it like a manual override?
Essentially, at the item level, we'll be changing the forecast that's coming out of the model, based on these things there.
On 2.6 million items?
So, I mean, a lot of it is, for example, price changes may happen at somewhere like more aggregate, so we'll make adjustments to all the items within that category. So inventory planning application, goal here is that we have all of this forecasting information basically condensed down into an easy to consume way for our stakeholders. And it's used in two main ways. So first of all, suppliers who are going to fulfill their demand directly through Wayfair. So they're going to use our Wayfair network of warehouses. Internal inventory planner is going to work with these suppliers in coordination with this planning application to make proposals to get the correct amount of inventory into the warehouses. And then secondary use cases, we have a lot of dropship suppliers as well at Wayfair who fulfill their own demand. Still sell on Wayfair's website, but Wayfair doesn't fulfill their demand at all. They're also going to have access to this inventory planning application to help with their own inventory decisions. This is kind of a screenshot of what the planning application looks like. I had to redact a little bit of information on the left and right, but kind of the general thing here is, this highlighted drop-down column that we have here, where it says Wayfair -18, lower -13. This is going to be, our main point forecast, along with our lower and upper bounds for our prediction intervals. The next column, which is this CG forecast, this is basically going to be, the forecast you select, plus the uplift if you decide to kind of take these policies that Wayfair is trying to incentivize, like faster shipping, lower instant rates, and things like that. And then the final column on the right is going to be the final inventory proposal for the supplier. And then, this is at the item level here. Okay, so I'll pass it now over to George, who's going to talk about the impact of Demetra.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. So I'd like to take a few minutes just to provide a brief overview of Demetra impacts internally within the company first, and then our assessment of potential impacts to the community, forecasting community. So first of all, in terms of internal impacts, we have 3+1 KPIs that we're primarily interested in. The first three have to do with forecast quality, and the fourth one has to do with the speed and efficiency of our pipeline and our forecast refresh process. So let's talk about the first two. They're out of sample RMSE and bias. In the x-axis, I'm providing here a kind of historical evolution of what has happened in terms of science development with us, with demand forecasting at Wayfair over the last few years. So prior to we put in production Demetra MVP, which Arsene Ryan described. Demetra MVP has the bottom up and top down, and the rudimentary assembler with just equal weights. We put it in production in the summer of 2023. Prior to that, we had experimented with just bottom up and just top down approaches separately. Once we put Demetra MVP into production, we saw a sizable improvement in RMSE and bias. Then around 6 months later, at the end of 2023, beginning of 2024, we transitioned to Demetra 2.0, which has further optimized versions of bottom-up and top-down components of Demetra, but still the rudimentary equal-weighted assembler. Further, a meaningful improvement in RMSE and bias, material improvement, and finally, in the summer of 2024, we put Demetra 3.0 into production, which is our current state. Demetra 3.0 has an enhanced bottom-up version. It has a more parsimonious feature set for our boosted tree, and it has also finally the differential assembler that gives different weights on top-down and bottom-up depending on the bucket of the catalog and the forecast horizon. And we saw further material improvement. So these are the first two KPIs. Another thing that our stakeholders care a lot about, both internal stakeholders, inventory planners, and external suppliers, is forecastability. So as Ryan was just mentioning, we publish our forecast every month, we refresh the forecast every month. And this is particularly relevant for highly seasonal items. And here I'm providing an example of winter seasonality. So November peaks. Given a forecast target month, you don't want your forecast to fluctuate too much from month to month published for that target month, because that creates churn downstream with the inventory planners and suppliers. It's just that bad experience. So we want to have our forecast flux. We have this the y-axis, the vertical axis, the month-to-month change on publishes, percentage change, and we want to have this band minus plus 10% on this month-to-month change, and we want to stay inside that band. And the blue line is what we had before Demetra. The orange line is what we got with Demetra. So a lot more stability, and that's also a material and meaningful improvement for our stakeholders. So those are the three KPIs related to the quality of the forecast. Finally, we have something else which is related to the speed of our publish refresh process and the efficiency of our pipeline. So this, the x-axis is the forecast published months, The y-axis is the number of days it takes from the beginning of the month when we launch the refresh process until everything is said and done, and the forecast is published in the IPA portal that Ryan was just describing. And we're going back to prior to, before Demetra, to 2022. So back then, it would be almost close to the end of the month by the time everything was said and done. Demetra was published, was first put into production in July of 2023, so right here. So as you can see, the remarkable thing about this graph here is this downward secular trend, how much progress we've made in terms of speed and efficiency of our pipeline and refresh process. This is due to our transition into GCP and our engineering efforts, making the pipeline more efficient. So we are not saying that this is primarily because of Demetra, but what happened with Demetra is once we put it into production, it kind of enhanced that process, that progress that we've been making, because we had a higher quality forecast, therefore fewer requests for sanity checks, explainability, overrides. It just enhanced the process basically. Primarily due to this GCP, but an enhancement because of Demetra. Again, that's meaningful to our stakeholders. So these are the three kind of more qualitative KPIs. I'd like to give you some ideas about assessments on the stakeholder side, but before I do that, I just want to give you also this slide on an assessment we've made internally on the science side on dollar impacts. So we did some simulation exercises. We focused on 20% of our US volume only, which is high volume for only high volume products fulfilled exclusively through our Wayfair's castle network. So the average gain associated with those Demetra forecasts, that is the money that would have been forgone if it wasn't for the higher quality forecast, the average across simulations is 6.8 million figure. This is a very conservative figure. It obviously ignores the remaining 80% of the US volume or volume from any other countries for that matter. Even conditioning this 20% is very conservative because it's adjusted downward to account for substitution effects. Supplier adherence and also non-suppliers won't necessarily buy our forecast. They won't adhere to our forecast. They could do their own thing. The notion that if we fail to fulfill an order from our network, then the suppliers may fulfill it themselves in a dropship manner, directly themselves. Furthermore, it also ignores all downstream effects on the supplier side, on the supply chain side, beneficial improvements in terms of transportation cost reduction, efficiencies in the warehouse, labor cost reduction, etc. Consumer side, improved availability, delivery of speed, therefore higher brand loyalty and higher customer lifetime value. So given all this, we believe we're safe to conclude that the financial interest several times higher than the 6.8 million figure that we're quoting here. So in terms of the assessment on the stakeholder side, we got this statement from Richard Matthew. Richard Matthew is our company's head of inventory replenishment platform analytics. His perspective is very important for us because he's the one person in the company that has a broad oversight and understanding of much of our space of downstream of the stakeholders, internal inventory planners and suppliers. So we're very gratified to see 3 points here. We put the entire statement in the application. I'm just putting an excerpt here. So 3 points I'd like to draw your attention to. First of all, he's talking about this qualitative leap since Demetra, forecast quality since Demetra was introduced. Second, he's talking about it's kind of compatible with our assessment of a financial impact in the tens of millions of dollars, annual gains. And finally, last but not least, he's talking about an improvement which is a lasting improvement, not a fleeting achievement. Demetra is month 20 of production now, and it's still going strong. So there is already a sustained track record of good performance that's been recognized internally by also by our suppliers. Finally, I'd just like to make one last point, and I know I'm kind of started stealing our lunch time, so I'm entering into dangerous territory here, but a last point about our assessment about potential impacts of Demetra in the community. And we're making 2 very specific points here. The first bullet point, has to do with forecasting practice. And in particular, it has to do with M5 competition. So M5 competition was very important for us because it's on Walmart hierarchical retail data. So a lot of similarities with our data. So of course we paid a lot of attention. One of the main conclusions from that competition was how good boosted trees and light GPM are. Most of the winning entries deployed light GPM in one way or another. But there was an important catch. The evidence of the M5 competition was limited to 28 days in the future. Now, 28 days in the future is way too short a future, a horizon, for the majority of our use cases given our inventory replenishment and supply chain cycles. So there is this gap, essentially, in the M5 competition. For people like us, we're left wondering, okay, light chicken is good, it's promising, but how do I know it's going to work not just 1 month in the future, but 6 months, or 3 months, or 12 months, etc. So we believe that our proposed solution comes to fill this particular gap in terms of the evidence from the M5. Demetra is a decent solution for producing forecasts 1 month into the future and several months into the future. And I'd like to stress here that this is true with a differential assembler, which is kind of idiosyncratic, specific to our data, the way we optimize things. But if you don't want to do differential assembler, you can just go for a weighted average. I mean, it's still going to work. So the other two components, going back to the blurbs that Brian described, there's 3 components of Demetra: the bottom up and top down, the differential assembler. You can forget about the differential assembler and just put top down and bottom up together in an unweighted fashion. You're going to get similar performance. At least that is our evidence. So that's the first point, the forecasting practice. We think that perhaps it's an attractive solution for practitioners grappling with similar types of data and supply chains. Second point is closer to the science side. So obviously there is very important reconciliation literature in hierarchical forecasting. What we're saying is that for our data, we'd like to add our evidence basically. For our data, Demetra is better in terms of accuracy at the particular level of the hierarchy, which is the bottom level of the hierarchy, in terms of our reconciliation bias. Part of the reconciliation literature seeks to compare reconciliation approaches to alternatives like bottom-up or top-down only at particular levels of the hierarchy. We're focusing at the bottom level, and we're saying for the bottom level, our evidence is that the kind of assembly that we do works better than the reconciliation approach we've tried. And that's it. We've written a science paper, and I put the link there, so we have more information on the paper, but I think we're out of time already.
Great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions. One is on the RMSE improvement, right? So RMSE is an absolute calculation. It's in measured units. Do you have any relative measure in percentage terms improvement? Can you share that?
I cannot share it. We also calculate demand-weighted mates, the so-called weights as we call them, which are more interest to the business side. So we track those as well. There is a high degree of correlation between those. That measure is more integral to the business side, but we focus on bias, which is what they care primarily about, and RMSE, which is kind of our main measure for model selection, etc., given the high degree of intermittency we have in our data.
Okay, got it. On the intermittent demand items, it seems like 70% of or more of these items actually have more zeros, right? Is that correct? Intermittent,
Yes.
The first or second slide. Yes. Okay, thank you. So I'm just wondering how forecasting would help in these cases. Largely, I mean, is the supply chain people, supply chain planners, are they using the forecast to determine safety stock and inventory levels, or do they have alternate methods for stocking for these items?
It really depends on the supplier. We're working with 20,000 plus suppliers. Some suppliers have their own forecasting methods. And some suppliers use industry standards like benchmarks, like moving averages, naive type of techniques. And we propose our own solution, and it's up to them to take it or not take it. So part, I also talked about adherence. That's something that we track, although not in a very systematic way so far. Yeah, they don't have to adhere to our forecast, but it's always available to them.
Just adding one point.
Yeah.
In the IPA, we have a.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in the IPA, we have a dashboard that compares our forecast to several benchmarks, naive, seasonal naive, and different moving averages. And basically in that dashboard, you can see the forecast value add. Every month that we publish, you can drill down to specific items and see whether this simple benchmark has been outperforming over 3 months, 6 months. We have different feedback. That is the tool that we give to suppliers to decide whether adhere to this forecast.
So what do you communicate to your suppliers, because these are all procured items, right? So what do you communicate to your suppliers is actually a forecast, or is just kind of an inventory included requirement number?
Both of them.
Both of us.
Both of them, so you add a safety stock as well?
Yes.
And then, okay, thank you.
How are you all tracking the adjustments on the forecast, like the impact of the adjustments?
So we have a very complicated data processing called SOT. Every steps that we add, we are keeping it in our database. So at the end, that is basically what you are asking is the exact request of our stakeholders. When the suppliers come back, for example, with a complaint, we need to explain every steps that we are adding, not only in terms of the forecast, but also in terms of what training data we use. Because we have a specific filtering that we are removing some things from training data. All of them is captured through our data basically processing pipeline.
So you had a really interesting combined bottom-up and top-down ensemble. Why did you consider optimal reconciliation?
So we consider reconciliation, and it outperforms reconciliation. We did structural WLS, and we just did a horse race at the bottom level. Our mandate is to kind of optimize forecast accuracy, the quality at the bottom level. So we consider reconciliation, and we horse race it against Demetra, and Demetra does better.
So perhaps I can just chime in on that.
Yeah, sure.
Because if you have intermittent demand at the bottom level, then reconciliation will happily give you a negative forecast. So I assume you accounted for that in some way by adapting.
Intermittency played a big role, and for intermittent, for closer to the tail of our catalog, top down was very influential, more influential than bottom up.
Following on that, we communicated with the author of the paper that Rob Hyman, and I forget the name of the lady, the HTS package. So they resolved that issue of the negative forecast, but still the issue that we were facing was when we reconciling, we were getting a more biased forecast than our reconciliation. And I believe there is another paper by Rob Hyman that in his also experiment, when they run the reconciliation on highly intermittent data, when evaluated at the lowest level, it is not outperforming the bottom-up approach.
Yeah,
And
that's
we
my
have it-
experience.
Right, there is
Demand. It's typically a measurable want, but in the intermittent situations, it's not quite as good.
It's a different story. And I don't think we're the only paper that shows this evidence. There is other papers.
Were you forecasting units or dollars?
Units.
And so when you aggregate up the hierarchy, I guess, when you're aggregating, beds and pillowcases and candlesticks and so on, in terms of units, I just kind of wonder a little bit about that.
We aggregate by the class level. So
Okay.
we follow that hierarchical structure. If you please go to Ryan.
Yeah.
Even Ryan has a better example. Which one? The single. Yes.
Yeah.
So the examples here, the item at the lowest level, what we mean by subclass and what we mean by class. So in each of those, there are some similarity between items. For example, sofa covers leather sofas
Yeah, I can see up to a certain level, it would make sense to do for units, but beyond that, it would not make sense.
That was the exactly thing that we explored when we tried different level of hierarchy. For example, at category level, things get mixed, and when we disaggregated to the item level, seasonality was not captured as well as the class level.
We'll take one more question and then we're gonna go to lunch. You can meet the Wayfair team at lunch and hit them up with your questions.
I just had a question, on your first slide, you talked about explainability of the solution, and if you look at the solution, there's a lot of complex parts to it, right, the ensembling, the detailed features, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm wondering if you could talk about what you had put into your end solution to be able to help make your solution explainable, your end visualization, to make that explainable to the end users. Did people take it with a grain of trust that the number that was put out was indeed the number, or did you have to unpack that? How did you have to explain that to your customers?
I think explainability has several aspects to it. So the inventory planning application we put together, which made the forecasts and the quantized the suggestions, for upper and lower limits and other things easily available and easily accessible, that enhanced explainability. The quality of our forecast was enhanced, and that also enhanced plausibility of our forecast, therefore explainability as well. We have a dedicated team that whenever there is questions from stakeholders on why does this forecast look like that, we go back, we look at the forecast, we contrast to the historical actuals, and we come up with a story that basically explains. And what we've noticed is that requests of this nature have gone down over time, basically.
Right. All right. Yeah. Thanks.